Good evening, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you are on our planet. My name is Allie Stifel, and I'm the director of the Regeneron Science Talent Search. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Elaine Edwards. Elaine, you can introduce yourself as well.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Elaine Edwards, and I'm the specialist for the Regeneron Science Talent Search. And we're so excited to present this office hours session to you today.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us. Today, we're so excited to answer questions that several of you submitted ahead of time for this webinar. We'll start there. And then if you have questions throughout this session, please leave them in the chat. And once we conclude answering the pre-submitted questions, we'll start to go through that list and get as many done as we can in this hour together. If we don't get to your question, never fear, we are happy to answer it in another way. We'll give you our email address where you can email any questions that you have about Regeneron STS. And you can send your question there now or anytime throughout the application cycle, and our team will be sure to get back to you. Before we dive into your questions today, we just wanted to give the shortest of overviews of what is the Science Talent Search. I assume that you're here today because you already are somewhat aware of this. Perhaps you've already opened an application, but just in case, Regeneron STS is the nation's oldest and most prestigious science research competition for high school seniors. It's a program that aims to identify future leaders in STEM. So it's a little bit different than some of the other science research competitions out there, which is why we want to make sure you're aware of and informed of our rules, because they can be a little different than some of the other programs. They're even different than our sister competition, which is the Regeneron ISAF. And I know a lot of you submitted questions about kind of the differences in some of the rules or what the implications might be for your research if you've done that program before. Regeneron STS application is open right now through November 9th. So be sure to mark your calendars with that November 9th deadline. And we are excited to see your application submitted then. The other thing we wanted to show you today before we answered your questions is are a whole bunch of resources that you may or may not already know exist. And the reason we wanted to share these with you is because these are all great places to go. If you have a question that maybe you think feel too silly to ask, never feel that way, but I know sometimes it feels that way. Or if you're trying to get an answer quickly and our team we're not fully staffed quite yet the way we will be once the application deadline approaches. So you might want a faster answer, or just to build your general knowledge about the program. There are a lot of places where you can look for information. I'll kind of tour you through some of them today, but if you want to take a screenshot of this slide, that would be a great thing to do, or to revisit when we repost the link to this webinar, then you'll know where you can find some of these things. So bear with me for one moment. Whoops. Okay, so first we wanted to show you the Regeneron STS website. This is the general website that lives on the Society for Science homepage. Society for Science is the nonprofit that owns and administers the Science Talent Search. That's who Elaine and I work for. We've owned the competition for 82 years. And so this is our society website, and this is the STS homepage on this site. Here you'll find all kinds of information on the homepage and the subsequent links that we'll see, including reminders about other webinars that are coming up in the future. So mark your calendars if you've not already for those. A little bit of information about STS. We have a sign up where you can get emails sent to you regularly with reminders about the application. Most importantly, the links in this grid here, all kinds of great links to dive into. First and foremost, we have a page for the official rules, which is where you can find the official rules book. It's linked a lot of places, so hopefully you've already seen it, but this is one place where you can easily find it. We link to a page that's also linked a few other places about common reasons why projects might not qualify for STS. So save yourself some heartache now by learning what those are. And then, so there's some information there about the official rules. We also have a frequently asked questions page on our society website, and it's a little bit different than the one you'll find on the application. So if you click here, you'll find a lot of answers to questions about, like, what is STS, who can apply to STS, what are the prizes, that kind of thing. So it answers some different questions than you'll find in the application FAQ that we'll show you momentarily. That's a little bit more nuts and bolts about the actual application. Let's see, there's also a page here that might be especially helpful to educators that shows kind of an outline of the application requirements, just the different tasks within the application and what they mean. There are also all kinds of, where are they? Here we go. Documents that are linked here that are found within the official rules book, but are also broken down here into individual sections in case that's easier for people to digest. So another place to look for information. You also should check out all the links up here in the header that are associated with the application page. So this is the application website. You probably are familiar with it already. And there are several really helpful links that reside here at the top. So we'll go through some of them together. The first is the application page, application FAQ page. I mentioned it's pretty robust. As you can see, there's a lot of text here. What I recommend, if you have a question about the application and you don't really feel like searching through this entire page, you can just word search, Control F, the term that you're looking for, and you'll probably find all kinds of information here. It answers some really specific questions like, I don't see my school listed in the dropdown in task 1, help. That's a great way to get an answer to that question. You can also always email our team, but we really do update this pretty frequently with questions. Once we receive them a couple of times, we want to make sure you have full access and transparency to answers. So check here. There's a good chance it's probably here. Another really helpful page, we also have a recommenders tips page. So if you are an adult recommender or you want to check this out to help support your recommenders who are writing recs for you, check out this page. It similarly has like troubleshooting questions and also questions about who should write recommendations. So definitely I recommend sharing this with your recommenders in case they have any questions or experience any issues as well. The other page here that we mentioned that's also kind of on the society website is this list of reasons that projects might fail to qualify for STS. We mentioned that the ISAF and STS have some slightly different rules when it comes to working with humans and animals. That can trip some students up. You might end up submitting a project to us that unfortunately doesn't meet our eligibility guidelines. So you want to be careful with that. I strongly recommend that you read through the rules book. That's really most important. But if you're looking for a checklist or you're an educator who's trying to help, or a mentor of any kind who's trying to help students come up with project ideas that would be eligible for STS, consider this a really helpful checklist of what to avoid. And then we have, last but definitely not least, the resource page. I love this page. Elaine has spent a lot of time, especially working on this. This page has information to hype you up. So some helpful, fun videos about what is STS, also an overview of the application requirements again. But best of all, we have a tour of the application. It's broken down into task by task to show you, one, how to do little things like save the page. How do you edit your work after you've already finished that section, that kind of thing. So check this out, but it's full of tips and tricks and kind of good things to know about each section. So I definitely recommend checking it out. Some information about paperwork, and then we'll be linking all the webinars here for the rest of the cycle. So I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of those resources as places you can turn to have your questions answered. All right, and now it's time to answer your questions. So here we go. All right, Elaine, you want to take the first one?
Sure, I'd love to. So we have Drew S, who's asked us a question. As a U.S. citizen residing abroad, will my application be considered separately or in the same pool of all applicants? Great question. Answer to this is that all applicants are considered in the same pool. So there are absolutely no distinctions. Everybody is considered by the same criteria, considered at the same time. If you're a U.S. citizen abroad, no, you are not going to be in some other pool.
Great. And that leads us into the next question. We received a question from someone who says, I'm from India, can I take part? It really depends. So if you are living abroad in any country and you are a US citizen, you are welcome to apply. If you're not a US citizen who's living in another country, STS unfortunately is not the program for you, but we recommend that you check out Regeneron ISAF and find the affiliated ISAF Science Fair in your area. On that similar note, we get questions about if I'm not a US citizen, but I live in the United States, can I apply? And the answer to that is yes. You can be of any citizenship as long as you are living and attending school in the United States, you're eligible. The next question, will Regeneron STS add a group project category, like 2 or 3 seniors? For kids without resources, they often work on the research project in summer camp. That means that they don't have a choice for an individual project. By doing this, it will definitely increase program participants and have more students opportunities. Really good question. So this is referring to our rule for the science talent search that students can only submit individual projects. So a student can only submit research that they have conducted without the help of other high school students. This has been our rule for the entire time the program has existed. For ISAF, our sister competition, ISAF does accept team projects. So I would recommend that anyone in this position turn there. Also a great competition. They're totally different competitions looking for totally different things. So for STS, I mentioned that we are looking for future leaders in science. So we consider far more than just the research project. That's one reason why the research project is important, but completing an individual application that tells us a little bit more about you is really the crux of what we use when making our decisions, and that context is important. We would love to be able to help every single research program. There are so many shapes and formats we know that educators and people who run programs follow. Some programs don't start their research projects until halfway through their senior year, so then they wouldn't be eligible to apply to STS either. On the flip side of that, there are a lot of programs out there that have decided to structure the work that they do where students are working on similar things, but answering different research questions. And so the students are not helping each other actually collect data, but you might be sharing similar resources that cuts costs down, that sort of thing. So that would be an interesting method to check out if you're in that position.
All right, so let's go into some project questions. It looks like the first one here is from Amac T, asking, can I use my ISAF project for Regeneron? You absolutely can, as long as it abides by all the other rules and guidelines that Allie mentioned are in our rules document, then yes, your ISAF project is absolutely eligible. So again, there are certain differences between ISAF and STS that you'll want to consider. Things like what we just discussed. If it's a team project, that's not going to be eligible by our rules. But if everything else about the project does abide by what is in those STS rules and guidelines, you're more than welcome to submit the same project that you've submitted to ISAF in the past. All right, and then let me see. Can we combine a project from 9th and 10th grade and use it for STS? This is also totally fine. STS accepts research from any year of high school. And we don't have any sort of limit on how long that research can have taken. So if that project took you 2 years, that's totally fine to submit. If it's a project that you worked on in 9th grade and you want to submit it now as a senior, that's also completely fine by those STS rules. Yeah. Great question.
And it's a really important distinction because that is a huge difference between ISAF and STS. For ISAF, you can only submit research you've conducted over a certain period of time within the past 12 or 18 months. So big distinction and another great way to share your work. All right, my student is planning to use ISAF research data for STS, but would like to modify the title. Does this affect the ISAF forms upload? Also a great question. So students certainly can use the same data, they can use the same project title, or you can change the title. We don't actually care. In reference to the ISAF forms, for anyone who might be wondering why is that connected, some types of projects require pre-approval. especially if you worked with humans, might do, if you do including surveys or testing like a product that you created that counts as human research, or you work with vertebrate animals. You might have ISAF forms that we don't necessarily even ask for within the STS application, depending on the subject. But if you have ISAF forms, they probably have the name of that old name for the same project, right? So we understand why you're asking this question. In this position, if you do decide to change your project, but you have forms with the old name on them, you can use them. But what would be great and help us out a lot for our rules review process, which we take very seriously, is just within task 3 of the application where you're uploading these things. There are a bunch of text boxes, different places. Somewhere in there, if you can just tell us, hey, these are the same forms for the same project. I just changed the title from X to Y. That's all we really need.
All right, so next question here is, I am currently working on my STS application. Since I'm not allowed to include any links to code in my paper, where do you recommend I include it? My research is primarily software-based. Another excellent question, we get this one all the time. We know that those of you working with code, you have a lot of code to share, and that doesn't always fit in your paper. One thing we recommend doing, screenshots can be really helpful. You can use those as your figures. Another thing is just focusing really on what's going to be most important to include in your paper. Thinking a little about, again, what is providing the most context to your research, and deciding from there what to include about your code. That's going to be the most helpful to you going forward.
Absolutely. The other reason this question is important, if someone's just getting started in the STS process, the way that students share their research with us, there are many essay questions in the application, but you also submit your research to us in the form of a 20-page research paper. We have some guidelines on our website, a bunch of places. You can probably search for those in the FAQ, your research report guidelines, that explain what are the limitations of this paper. So 20 pages really is the cap. The 20 pages do not include your cover page or your bibliography. Everything else is included. So if you chose to format your paper in the form of like everything is text heavy in the front and then you have appendices in the back where you're trying to show figures, or sometimes students just mix the figures in, also totally fine. We don't have a preference with that. But just know appendices count towards that 20-page limit. And like Elaine said, we get this question a lot with computer science and coding. Every year we address this concern with our judging panel, and they really prefer what Elaine has just suggested, that you really isolate what is the most unique component, what do you really need to provide context to understand your project. They're not looking to see hundreds of pages of code. Great. The next question is, if my research focuses on microbiology and virology specifically, would medicine be the most appropriate category? I wish I could answer this for you. We do have a policy that we cannot guide students towards selecting a category. But here's how I would strategize if I were you choosing a category with this information in mind. We have in the rules book and within the application in task 4, we link to the specific PDF about this as well. There's a description page that includes a little overview of every single one of the STS categories. Check those out. And you might find some guidance there that will push you in one direction or another. We know that projects are really interdisciplinary these days. We also know that what we always recommend to students is to think about what's the best kind of scientist to review and really understand this work, because that's the kind of person who will review your project who has expertise in that category. But yeah, something like microbiology, it could fall under medicine. It might fall under environmental science. It could fall under like cell and molecular. It really depends what you're doing and what your research question is. So think about what kind of scientists could read it best, and also think about reading that PDF.
And I think we actually had a question from Annabelle before as well that we might have skipped. So I apologize for that, Annabelle. But it looks like you also asked, my research last year was through a paid summer program, but this year I'm continuing research without any program. Should I still indicate that this was paid if I'm not using material from last year? Excellent question. What Annabelle is referring to here, for anyone unfamiliar with the application or the history of STS, is actually a new question we've added, asking whether or not you completed your research at a program that you paid to attend. Important to note that that is totally fine. You're welcome to submit research that was completed at one of these paid summer programs. We've just added that so that's something that we now understand and know. Again, it's all about the context with STS, and so that's just another question that helps us do that. So in this specific case, Annabelle, we would suggest go ahead and just indicate, yes, it was started at a paid summer program. You can then provide us that context of saying, hey, I started it here at this paid program, and now I'm continuing it on my own in a situation where there's no money involved. Again, as much information as you can provide to us, that's going to be the most helpful for the folks reviewing your application. Great question.
Absolutely. And yeah, like Elaine said, the drop down should have a notes box there with easy place to add that clarifying info. All right, our last question in this section: if my project is about knocking out a hypothesized gene for a specific phenotype, and we establish that the gene is not responsible for the phenotype, can we still write a paper about it, since it technically was not successful since nothing new was created? Yeah, absolutely. Science is all about trial and error, right? So sometimes you don't achieve the goal you set out to achieve, but you learn something by doing that. So we see so many projects that do extremely well who fall in this exact position. So don't let that hold you back. Like we've mentioned a couple times here, and we mention all the time, STS is not just about the research. Sometimes it's about what you learn doing the research. It's about the other ways you show leadership in your community. Your proclivity for science, all of these things matter in our process. So if you, just because you believe it's a failed project, it's still probably a great learning experience, and it's very common.
Okay, let's talk about recommendations, rules, and forms. You all had some great questions under this category. First one here is, can a retired science teacher I had provide a recommendation letter? She just retired this past year, and I had her for 2 years and continue to talk with her, but she no longer works at my school or is an active teacher. This is also completely fine. Mostly what we're looking for in the educator recommendation is someone who can speak to your abilities as a learner, to what you're like in a classroom setting. And so in this situation, a teacher who is retired is absolutely, completely 100% fine. As long as, again, like you have that contact info and you're able to still stay in touch with her and reach out to her in order to have her complete this recommendation. That's absolutely fine.
All right, next question. Under task 3, it says optional paperwork, file upload, ISAF forms. Can you clarify which ISAF forms are needed? This question is from Priya. This is a great question. So if you're just getting started with the application, you may not know that task 3 is our rules wizard. Essentially, you're asked a long series of if-then questions, like, did you work with humans? Yes, then a whole bunch of other questions pop down that will eventually ask you to upload some specific paperwork to show that you had pre-approvals to do that kind of work. So that's kind of the simplified version of what you'll find in task 3. At the very end of task 3, on the second page, there's this upload that Priya is referring to here that says it's an optional paperwork upload where you can upload your ISAF paperwork. What this is for, there are kind of two things. I mentioned before that we don't always require paperwork for certain types of projects that you might have gone through those hoops for ISAF. If you have that paperwork because you participated in ISAF and we didn't ask you for it because your project didn't work with humans, animals, or PHBAs, and we probably aren't asking for it. But if you have it, go ahead and upload it. It's always good for us just to double check that everything was done safely, for sure. Also, sometimes like our wizard can be a little bit confusing to people because it is pretty complicated, and we acknowledge that. So we want to give people the opportunity to just double check that everything that you think you're supposed to have is there. Maybe you have like an extra letter from a mentor that like says, oh, so-and-so really did not harm animals in this project, and we maybe didn't ask you for that depending on an answer to a question, but you have that and you think it would be helpful. Anything that we haven't required from you already in another task that you have and are willing to share, more is always better when it comes to making sure you've followed the rules, so feel free to give it to us there.
All right, what are the limitations for a Regeneron STS science project? This is a very broad question, I think we'll first acknowledge. So there are some basics that we've mentioned already. Things like the fact that your research needs to have been done independently, can't be a team project. Things like the eligibility requirements. So again, that's US citizens living abroad or anyone attending their final year of secondary school here in the United States. For all those reasons and more, you're going to want to check out what we've mentioned before, those rules and guidelines. It is required that you read through all of those before submitting your application, and we'll have you attest to that in order to submit. So that's going to give you a much better idea of the limitations of your Regeneron STS science project.
Absolutely. And just to give a really short overview of what some limitations are, in terms of the scientific rules, I've mentioned a couple of times, if you work with humans or vertebrate animals and PHBAs, you probably have to submit some kind of pre-approval to have worked with those things. There are also rules about what you cannot work with and what you cannot do. So students who apply to STS cannot be designing studies that will lead to death invertebrate animals or stress. And there's some other specific guidelines too around handling of animals. So definitely check that out. It's really a case-by-case basis. We did a webinar last year that was a very in-depth overview of the STS rules, and that is linked on the resources page. So if you're curious about that, check there. The rules do change a little bit from year to year, so we always recommend checking out the latest rules book, like Elaine said, but that might at least provide a nice overview. Judging questions, everyone's favorite topic. I'll let Elaine take the first one.
All right, so does Regeneron STS favor one science fair topic atop of others? Easy answer to this is no, absolutely not. You can submit, you can see that we have a whole list of categories in that rules book under which you can submit your Regeneron STS project. None of those is favored or weighted more heavily over any other. We also understand that a lot of research is totally interdisciplinary, and you might feel for one reason that your project can't be put into one category, but you have to for the application. Don't let that cause you any stress. The category you choose, again, you are choosing the scientist or the evaluator who is going to have the expertise to best review your project. So don't let that be a source of stress for you. Again, no topic is favored more heavily than any other.
Yeah. The other thing to add to this that might also help answer our prior question about category choice, it is important because where it's placed kind of first will help the evaluators who start to read it get off to a good start. However, if the evaluators start to read it and they decide, you know what, I'm not the right person for this, I don't have this expertise. It's rare with PhD scientists reading these, but it does happen. What they do, we have a mechanism where they alert us and we reassign to other categories in the recommended area of expertise. So just never fear, and know that we will have qualified people reading your paper, even if you're worried that you might have miscategorized it upon the application process. All right, next question. If I feel that my research doesn't have very groundbreaking results, am I still encouraged to apply? Yes, you do not have to be doing something groundbreaking to be successful in Regeneron STS. You'll see a wide variety of projects making the finals. Another great thing to check out, also on our website, you can find a set of 40 videos of the finalists from last year describing their research. That's a great place to get inspiration, to learn about what they've done, but you'll see it does really run the gamut. It's very different by discipline too, like what is considered groundbreaking. And so no, a good study doesn't have to be groundbreaking, especially at the high school level. We understand that we see all sorts and all levels of research. And again, not to keep saying it, but I'll say it again. It's about so much more than just the research project. So keep that in mind too. If you're like, I didn't have the best project at my high school, but I do all these other cool things and I like really want to be a scientist, and that really shows in your application, you have just as good a chance of anyone else.
And this very much won't really say anything new, but is the novelty or interdisciplinariness of the topic a part of the judging criteria? To an extent, sure, we can say part of it. Your whole application is being judged. And so, yes, there is an element where the research project, if it is super cool and novel, obviously that is going to catch our judges' eyes. But just as Allie said, it is about so much more than that. So again, if you don't feel like your research is maybe necessarily the most cutting edge, there are still lots of ways in which you can shine in your application. That can come through in your essays, that can come through in your activities. The easy way to think about this is that every part of the application counts. Do your best to stand out in every part, every task of that application.
Exactly. And the other point to make here, when we say that it's about who you are and so much more, tell us about yourself and your struggles and your home situation and what you have access to. We rely on your recommenders to tell us this as well. It really is all about context, right? And what you have access to. Like if you live in an area that doesn't have a lot of laboratory access for high school students, you may not have access to the equipment to do something as cutting edge, but you're still exploring and maybe even making progress in a field, just may not look as fast as someone who's from an area where that's much easier for them to access. We take that into consideration. So don't let that get you down either. The more we know about you, really, truly, the better. All right, and this kind of answers this question too. For a winning submission, does our research need to be on the level of PhDs and professors, or does it need to exceed their levels? No, it doesn't need to be on the level of PhDs or professors. It doesn't need to exceed their levels. Sometimes it does. That's great. There are reasons why it does sometimes. Sometimes that's because you had access to a fancy lab and fancy equipment. There's nothing wrong with that. That is not held against anyone. Certainly, you get to do some really cool stuff and get amazing experience that way. So we're happy for you when that's the case. But we know that's not the case for everybody. And so we can't compare them in the same way, right? Or we have to consider all the factors. So no, it doesn't have to be on the same level. If you feel like it's not, and that's a reason you may not apply, don't look at it that way. Please do share. We would love to know what you're doing. All right, and now we're happy to take your questions if there are any in the chat, and Elaine is going to help us by answering them.
Okay, so we do have a couple coming through in the chat here. Our first one, it looks like, says the research report guidelines say to include a short intro describing the background and purpose of the work. Could you clarify how short means? And sort of a follow-up to that question, we can just answer those two together. How do we contextualize the problem we're solving if we can't provide that brief literature review? Do we have to do that in the introduction?
Yeah, so your literature review essentially is your introduction for the STS paper. You know, it depends on the subject area for sure. If there's really specialty information that you think someone needs to know to understand your work, I would include it. In terms of like the appropriate length, it varies by discipline. And it's your choice. So how much space are you trying to take from your 20-page paper? I would say on average, we would see maybe 2 pages of an introduction, but it really depends. Like some papers are dealing with brand new areas of science where the student feels like it really benefits the paper as a whole to provide more context. So it's really hard to answer that without knowing what you're doing, I would say, but I wouldn't make it half of your paper because then you're not going to have as much time to tell us about what did you do and what were your results and how did you come to that. So don't sell yourself short by not including it and making it long enough to make it understandable to someone. But yeah, that would be my advice. Around 2 pages, but more is totally fine.
Okay, a quick follow-up question here. Let me see. Okay, so sort of along the lines of formatting, someone is asking, are bib text citations allowed or do they have to be APA? A basic answer to this is, again, as Allie said, follow the guidelines of your discipline. That's a really easy way. Whatever style of citation they tend to use, that's probably going to be best for your paper. We don't prescribe any, we as Regeneron STS don't prescribe any specific citation formatting guidelines. All right, and then another question here, easy one, can juniors compete in STS? So STS is a competition for high school seniors, so those in their last year of secondary school. If you're graduating early or have other extenuating circumstances, right in task 1, you have the ability to explain that situation to us, your counselor, in the high school report. So the third type of recommendation we ask you for will also be asked to corroborate and verify that information. But otherwise, the easy line is, yeah, you need to be in your last year of secondary school.
However, I will add that we are delighted you are interested, and we encourage anyone, adults included, feel free to open an application and explore it. In task 1 of the application, it will ask you, are you a real applicant for this year? Like, are you a 12th grader? Or are you just someone who's exploring? Click the I'm exploring button. Just so we know not to like count it within the pool. We would hate to count it and then have to not allow you to compete the next year, right? So it is important. And we would definitely, but yeah, encourage you to check it out. It doesn't change that much from year to year. Some new questions here or there, but the format, especially for next year, won't be changing too much.
Great, so a couple more here that I think we have time for. I experimented with commercially available human cell lines exempt from IRB approval, but my mentor does not have access to the specific receipts. What information do I need to provide?
Yes, great question. So that is an exempt cell line. If it's commercially available, that's totally fine. Ideally, if your mentor would have the receipts from the original purchase to show us proof of purchase and kind of the lineage of how you came to access those cells. However, if they don't have them, if it's like an ATCC line, you can usually provide us with a number, but we'll also ask for if your mentor can just write like a 3-sentence letter that you can upload that says, I'm so-and-so, I'm this student's mentor, I purchased this line, name of the line from this place, approximately at this time. That verification will work for us as well.
Okay, for a student's project and work already accepted to publication, can this work still be used for applying to STS? Yes, absolutely. We do welcome published papers. Kind of along the lines of everything we've been saying, it's very important that you tell us that your paper was published. And there are spaces within the application where you can do so. And again, that just helps us know that you didn't copy somebody's paper off the internet, for instance. And sort of what might be helpful with those guidelines as well. When we're talking about publications, you know how sometimes you are the first author, sometimes you are not the first author. For STS, we do recommend that you are either the first or sole author on any paper that's been published that you're using as your paper for Regeneron STS. Again, this just helps us to verify the independence of your work. When there are a lot of authors, it's a little more difficult for us to tell what was the work that you did. And in a competition that is so much about you as an individual and about a holistic assessment of your abilities as a scientist, that's really important for us to be able to understand from the paper. But in general, yes, totally fine to use a published paper.
Yeah, a few more things to elaborate on that as well. We know that some disciplines treat first author a little different. So it's possible that you really were the primary author of the paper, but you're not the first author. It's not as common, but we do hear of that. which is why in task 4, it's the section Elaine is talking about, there's a question that asks, are you submitting published work? If you click yes to that question, you're asked to answer a few other questions like, are you the first author or sole author? Are you one of many authors? Explain your role for this full work. Your mentor is going to be asked the same question in the mentor recommendation. So they'll be asked to verify like, oh yeah, the student, they're not listed as the first author because that's not what our discipline does, but they really wrote 99% of this paper themselves. So they help provide that context for us. But in most circumstances, like Elena is saying, if you are one of many authors and you're submitting part of that work to STS, we don't recommend submitting the actual publication. We recommend that you redraft kind of what you did and submit it as a package to STS. You should still check that box that, yes, I'm submitting published work. Here's the reference to the published work, just so that our plagiarism detector, when it inevitably matches your paper, we can then, as human beings, we go through all of that and we can better understand this is allowable because the student told us about this, so we knew to look out for it.
Okay, so another question here. If we were given a project in a PI's lab that we didn't come up with, but we had novel ideas related to that project that we researched, can this be eligible for submission?
Totally. This is super common. Happens all the time. Like we said before, we never discount student for an opportunity that they have. So you had an opportunity to work in a real lab. That's awesome. And this is the circumstance that comes from it is maybe you didn't pick the idea, or like you love astronomy more, but here you are in like a wet lab. You know, that's what happens sometimes, and you still learn from that. So we get that. If you've tried novel methods or approached the question at hand in a really unique way, that's awesome. Students become finalists like this all the time, and their research mentors help kind of back that idea. Your mentor will tell us. I think we ask them, does the student come up with a question themselves, or did you give it to them? And it's never held against the student. It's just like helpful context to have.
Okay. Do you need to affiliate yourself with your school for STS like you would for ISAF? This is an excellent question. This is another very important difference between our sister competition, ISAF, and STS. No, you do not need to affiliate with a school. So for anyone who's unfamiliar with ISAF, you need to compete at a society-affiliated science fair in order to be eligible to compete at Regeneron ISAF. For STS, there are none of those requirements. You are submitting as an individual, and you can submit from any school, again, as long as you abide by all those other eligibility guidelines. You're welcome to participate and very much encouraged to do so. So even if nobody from your school has ever competed in STS before, absolutely, please feel free to submit an application.
Yeah, and as many students from your high school can apply. There are no caps. Like at ISAF, only a certain number of students from a region can then represent. At ISAF, 100 kids from your school could apply to STS, and we would be thrilled. And then also, you don't have to affiliate with the school, but you do have to tell us what school you go to as part of the application, but it's not like an affiliation.
Okay, I think we have time for a couple more. Hi, hello. I'm working alongside college students, and I know that the rules say that it is permitted, but we need to be clear with what everybody has done. How do I go about doing that?
Great question. So you totally can work with college students. You'll be asked to tell us about who was in the lab with you when you did this research. And you can tell us then that there were college students and mentors, PIs, or maybe there was nobody, like it depends on your circumstance. But that's where you can tell us about that and tell us what you did versus what they did. Your mentor is asked the same question: who worked on this work with the student? And sometimes the answer is no one. And sometimes it's just like, oh, they had some oversight. And then it ranges to they worked in a big lab with a lot of people around. So they're asked to tell us about that and to outline how your contribution is different. So there are a couple of places where those questions are covered in the application.
Okay, for the educator recommendation letter, can my Science Bowl coach write the letter? Another great question. Yes, absolutely. We understand that learning takes place in environments that happen outside the classroom. And so you are more than welcome to have a supportive adult in your life. Maybe that's a coach, maybe that's a boss at a job. Submit one of those educator recommendation letters. If you do that, we do recommend, however, you have space to request 2 educator recommendation letters. Just for our reference, just again for building context, we do recommend that you have a teacher. Maybe they're not a teacher who knows you as well as this other person that you want to write your recommendation. We recommend that you do reach out and ask them to complete one just the same, just because again, that is helpful for us in learning what you're like as a learner in a specifically classroom setting. Okay, and let me see. If our paper or if our work is not published in a journal but listed on a public database like archive, should we still check the yes, this is published work to avoid the plagiarism detector?
I would, yes, please, please do. There's another question in task 6 that asks about like preprint services like that. And so you can also list it there. Both places are great. I would do both. And as long as it's somewhere though, that this other version of the paper exists on the internet, we'll know to look for it, or when it comes up as a match, we'll know to clear it. Also, sometimes these things just naturally pop up and we can tell the context of it, so it's okay. But yeah, I would reference it. It just makes things a little clearer.
Okay, if a student performed work in their parents' lab, how is it addressed? Is there a place to disclose this?
Yes, totally allowed. Again, any path towards a STEM career we think is a great one. So we would never discount an opportunity a student has to work in a lab or gain that experience. However, it is really important that it's disclosed in the application. Parents can write letters of recommendation, happens all the time, but please tell us if it's your child who you're writing about, and then again, it's just important context to have. We also really, so in the application this year, we've added some new questions around this. So you should see it right off the bat in task 4 and in the educator and project recommendations. We ask people to report any known conflicts of interest like parental involvement or close family friend. We also see some circumstances where maybe a student is working in a lab of a close family friend who maybe is employed by a parent, kind of thing. Please disclose that as well. We will sometimes disqualify students for hiding that kind of information. Unfortunately, it has happened sometimes in the past. So just be upfront about it and it's all good. We just want to know.
Okay, and I think that is most of the questions we've received. I have one last one for you, Allie. When do you announce the final winners?
Oh, great question. This year, we will announce the top 40 finalists on January 24th. And the top 300 scholars are 2 weeks prior to that. So what does that put us at? January, should know it off the top of my head, but we just set the date. January 10th for top 300 scholars, January 24th for the top 40 finalists. The 40 finalists will then be invited to travel to Washington, D.C., all expenses paid, for the actual competition week, where they are judged on another level. And that takes place here in D.C. March 8th through 15th. And we conclude the week with an awards gala where the top 10 winners are named, including the first place prize winner of $250,000. And that will take place on March 14th. So Pi Day, what an exciting Pi Day for all. We'll look forward to announcing our top winner then. It could be you. I hope it is. Wouldn't that be great?
All right, and if you didn't get a chance to ask your question again today, that is completely fine. As Allie said, we are available over email. If you email us at sts@societyforscience.org, we will do our best to get back to you as timely as possible with any questions you might have. That's also great for if you have a really specific question, maybe related to the rules concerning your project. Definitely give us that context. We want to help you out as best we can, but feel free to reach out over there. And thank you all so much for attending today.